father's sins. The trail of terrifying horror that led to Gerald and Charlene Gallego by Ray Biondi and Walt Hickox. This is the backside. As you can see, this is Ray Biondi. This is the main detective who worked on the case, and Walt Hickox, pictured here, was a reporter during the time of these heinous murders. I wanted to go ahead and give you a little fun backstory, I guess you could say. So about 3 weeks ago, I was out to dinner with my stepdad and my mom. They know that I do these true crime cases. And if I were not in the dental field, I would most likely be a detective myself. I love true crime and justice. Even walking around, seeing people break the law irks me so hard. And I think to myself, if I were a police officer, I'd have that guy in cuffs right now, that kind of thing. So back to my parents. My stepdad and I, as well as my mother, were out to dinner. My stepfather, my mother, and I were out to dinner. As we were eating dinner, my family and I were discussing the fact that my stepdad knows of this man and this case. He was giving me a little bit of background on the man, Gerald Gallego, and he actually worked in the prison in which Gerald was held, and was the police officer that had to read the letters of Gerald and Charlene going back and forth. When you are in prison and jail, I guess, for that matter, if you get a letter, that letter is first read by authorities to make sure there isn't any craziness going on. You know. And my stepdad was the officer who read their love letters back and forth to each other. And he said it was very, very fascinating that this woman would still love this man and correspond with him while in prison after turning him in. So let's get into the book. All his father's sins. So I'm going to read a bit, stop, take notes, go along with it with you. I've read this book before, but I did want to read you a bit of it as well, and then talk about the passages that I read. So, this book is of course called All His Father's Sins. And a little background on Gerald. He actually had a father who did die in prison due to the death sentence. He murdered, I believe, 2 men. forestry supervisor came down and got me out. I returned to work, but later my buddy and I quit, and we hauled for Sacramento, California. We arrived there around 7:30 that morning, September 11th, 1945. There is a reason for me remembering that date, which you will learn later on. We were hungry, so we found a cafeteria and had breakfast. Before being seated, I happened to see two young girls. They were sitting by themselves, so I nudged my buddy and we took our trays over there and sat down and started talking to them. We asked them if they were eating, or they were only drinking coffee, and they said no. And it was learned that they were low on money, so we treated them to breakfast. After the breakfast, we went out of our way helping them to find jobs, but to no avail. After about 3 hours of this running around, my buddy suggested we go swimming. So we bought the girls bathing suits, but never did go swimming. For the girls sitting on my lap, her name was Lorraine. She came right out and asked me to marry her. I said I would, jokingly. I protested, but I was soon to get married that day in Reno, Nevada. We met the girls that day and were married a few hours later. To this day, my wife and I are still married, but we have been separated for some time now. She conceived our child, a boy. He would be 8 years old, July 17th. And this was from the statement of Gerald Albert Gallego, Jackson, Mississippi, 1954. Something I want to say, actually really funny. This book is literally falling apart. I don't know if you can tell, but it's literally falling apart. And my stepdad has owned this book since this all happened in the 80s, so it's a 40-year-old book. So if I'm kind of struggling to hold this, that is why. And I truly hope that you don't mind the mufflers, as I only have this specific time to record. So I'm going to go ahead and put this over here so I can just kind of glance and read it a little bit better. So the killing started late in the summer of 1978. Gerald Armand Gallego awoke early in the morning of September 11th. Sacramento was sizzling, as it always is late in that month. These are facts. You know, like the dark pavement. In Sacramento heat, you can just see the heat waves just flaring off of them. I used to think that you could get sunburned from those heat waves, because I legit was just always getting sunburned. Wear your sunscreen, kids. There would be girls in the shopping centers and on the streets. Tender, barefoot teenage girls, tan and lovely in their tank tops and short shorts. Gallego thought about Sally Jo, his little Sally Jo, his daughter, who had become his first sex slave long before the little gentle fingers of puberty began to mold her breasts in fashion questions in her child's mind. This statement here, I believe, is saying the child hadn't even grown into a woman before being sexually assaulted by her own father. He glanced at the young woman sleeping beside him. She was petite, tiny almost. She would help him. She would do anything he told her to do. He was sure of that. Looking at her, he made a decision. Today is the day, he announced. Today is the day we make my fantasy come true. The young woman beside him opened her little eyes. Times had changed for Charlene Williams. The little lady was gone. She had started to disappear when Charlene was 13 and just a little girl, really, even if she did attend Rio Americano High School. The neighborhood high school, which was designed to educate the precocious offspring of Sacramento suburbia's prosperous upper middle class. My father, my real dad, actually went to high school, I believe, with Charlene. It was around the same time. Very odd. That's why I'm so invested, because everything's like connected to me, and we're, I don't know, it's just weird. But the good times were still not out of reach. Not then, not later, when she was almost kicked out of high school. She would then be expelled, and she reflected, had she not already earned her diploma. So she actually got kicked out of high school, but actually was done with all of her classes, so she just graduated early. Nor were they out of reach later when she married Craig, sweet, innocent, giving Craig, or even Gary, no good, lazy, procrastinating, heroin-shooting Gary, who should have been at the bottom of reach. Even then, the good days were still around. Daddy was there to help, as were Grandma and Mother, with all the wonderful things that they wanted for her. They were there in Carmichael, waiting for her. On that September morning, the good times were still nearby, still waiting, still available. By nightfall, September 11th, 1978, everything would be gone out of reach forever and ever. This man, the man she had known, was the only man for her the moment she laid eyes on him, was ready to fulfill his fantasy. Charlene didn't believe him. He had told her about his fantasy. He had been talking about it a lot ever since he found out she was pregnant. Jerry was mad because she was pregnant. He didn't like that at all. And then an abortion appointment was then set up. Now he was ready to fulfill his fantasies. Of course, she didn't believe him. Jerry wanted a harem, a cachet of slave girls, young, tender, delectable, who would do anything that he wanted, anytime that he wanted. So, Charlene had been with him long enough by them to know that he wanted a lot sexually. But how in God's name was he going to fulfill his fantasy? Jerry was making plans. He told her what they would do. They would take the van, the big, practically new van. Daddy had never intended it to be used for anything except transportation and pleasure when he co-signed and made the possible loan which financed the purchase. They would drive to a shopping center. This was his plan. They're going to drive to a shopping center. The Sunrise Mall, maybe, or the Country Club Mall, where they would be young women there, and very young women. The younger the better, strolling through the mall, dressed up for Sacramento's eternal September heat. Delicious dollies, supple and succulent, hips swaying as they strolled barefoot over the hot concrete sidewalks, buttocks peeking beneath the hems of short shorts, breasts straining against the reluctant restraint of scantily halters. So this is Gerald. They're kind of describing how you would see just teenagers walking down the street, young little girls. This is how he viewed them. Sick and twisted. So Jerry didn't drool when he talked about his slaves, but the effect was the same. His eyes slobbered if his mouth did not. His expression licked lupine lips, although his tongue confined itself to obscene plans. what was happening that morning. She did not believe Gerald. She thought it was all a test, a plan to see if she loved Gallego. So she was just kind of curious, is he testing me? What's going on? She was a woman that would do anything for this man. Anything, as you will soon find out. She had lived with the girl with a heart for a long time, almost from the beginning, except perhaps for those first few weeks when Jerry was moving into her life and on something better than his best behavior. On that steaming September morning, when Jerry decided to convert obscene fantasies into reality, she faced the test. That is what she thought, or what she has always said she thought. It was like any time, an incredible, impossible anytime. They drove the van to the Country Club Plaza in Sacramento, and Jerry talked about his plans while Charlene sat beside him thinking it wasn't real. It would stop anytime. All of a sudden, he would stop planning and smile and say, well, you passed the test and you're just like the good girl with the heart, and it would be over. But Jerry just kept driving, turning the van into the parking lot at the Country Club Mall and giving her instructions while they parked, telling her how to pick out the right girls and get them into the van, and stopping at a 5 and dime store to buy tape, 2-inch wide adhesive tape he said he would use for bindings and gags. Still, she didn't believe it, not then, not ever, except perhaps in some deep subconscious recess of Charlene's mind where she hides from reality. It wasn't happening. It simply was not happening. When Jerry told her he would wait in the van while she went and found the girls, it was all part of the act. He left her to wander alone through the big mall, looking at shoes and dresses and girls and girls and girls. She loved dresses, always wore dresses when she could, and then more girls. I relate to that, not the looking for girls part, but the wearing dresses part. I wear dresses all summer long. As soon as it gets past 80, dress season, they're just so easy. You don't even have to play anything. You just throw it on. But I need to take a sip really quick. I'm thirsty. The morning aged while the blistering Sacramento Valley sun mounted steadily higher in a brassy sky, and there were girls, lots of girls wearing short shorts and t-shirts and halters and tank tops, walking on tender and innocent baby legs, and barefoot over sidewalks that were beginning to sizzle. Morning waned, and the temperature rose as afternoon assaulted Country Club Plaza. Now this is located on Watt Avenue in Sacramento, California. The Country Club Plaza was a place I went a lot as a child. There was a hometown buffet that we went to every year after all the kids went Christmas shopping. My mom would all give us a 20, let us run free in the mall, and then meet back at hometown buffet and we'll have some dinner. That was like a tradition. But now this Country Club Plaza is not as popular as it once was. This plaza used to be full of people, like the most popular place, but as the city grew and Roseville became more popular, the Galleria Mall and the Art and Fair Mall became more popular, as I've heard. So the Country Club Plaza was basically just a little strip mall. It still exists to this day, but there are only a couple of stores. They used to have a Macy's and a JCPenney's and a Ward's, if you know what that is, that kind of thing. But now there's only a few stores. There's like a Victoria's Secret and a couple of jewelry stores, and there's a See's Candy, and you know, those little mall trinket shops when you're walking through, they're trying to sell you stuff, that kind of thing. So just imagine, as a kid, you're just in there something negative, but doing it on behalf of a grown man for sexual favors. And so then Jerry was at her side, snarling, growling, and rutting animals, scenting sex, telling her she was destroying his plans. "You're fucking it up. You're deliberately trying to fuck it up," he said. He was outraged and hurt and insulted because she was not reacting properly, not helping him with his plans, his obscene fantasy, and rapacious obsession. While he talked, he walked by her side along the mall and pointed to a pair of youngsters, children in women's bodies, who were standing just outside a fast food restaurant that specialized in hot dogs. "Get them," he ordered. "They're the two I want. Get them into the van. I'll take over from there." He melted into the late afternoon flow of pedestrian traffic through the mall. Charlene walked towards the girls, and she got them. Incredibly, she convinced them to follow her to the van. Charlene was good at following instructions. She could do anything, remember anything, untangle any puzzle, and more than anything else, she could be led by anyone. So, like the genie in the bottle, she has not only obeyed orders, she produced the orders, it says. Thinking about how she would complete her task instead of what she would accomplish led Charlene to the side of Kippy and Rhonda Scheffler, one of them 16 and the other 17. Pretty girls, really, with the extra summer glow that youth always finds in the heat of summer. They were girls who looked a little bit like Charlene if she had thought about it just as if she dug deeply enough and tried to put the pieces together, looked a little bit like Sally Joe. While she moved closer to the girls, the camera in Charlene's mind photographed them, as it does everything she sees. One was pretty, really cute, with long brown hair, falling loosely over the pink and blue sweater she wore over her Levi's. Her fingernails were painted brown, a root beer brown, contrasting darkly with her beige suede shoes, with their thick, spongy soles. The other girl was nice looking, but heavier, and her reddish hair was cut shorter than her companion's. She smiled a lot, and her body wriggled seductively under the white and black striped sweater and inevitable Levi's. They blended well with the late summer scenery and moving parts of a youthful, shifting tableau, noticeable but not noticed, an attractive frame in a pretty motion picture. Kippy and Rhonda cannot speak for themselves, have no way of defending their integrity or reputations. They were close enough to Charlene's age, so they would feel a bond with her. At 20, she was almost a teenager herself, as if she was ever a teenager. She spoke their language and knew what words to use, and the girls then followed. On to the next page. Charlene claims she promised them pot, and they followed expecting a stick or a roach or whatever it is pot lovers smoke. We call them joints now. Kippy and Rhonda followed their guide to the van, where Charlene opened the door and asked them to come in and sit down. As soon as they were settled, the door opened again, and they were face to face with Jerry, who asked them to stay and engraved his invitation where he gestured with the little nasty weapon he held in his right hand. And this part is what my stepdad was talking to me about. Apparently, in the report, it is stated that the girls were so far from him with his weapon, with that little gun. My stepdad said if only those little girls knew, if only they knew how hard it would be to shoot them if they were a moving target. The second they saw the gun, if they were to bolt away, it would have been very hard for Gerald to hit them. And my stepdad was talking to me about this and basically had tears in his eyes, because because I'm like about to cry because this is the start of something evil. He found that he actually could control all of these women, including Charlene, to go get his, prey. And I just sit there and I try to put myself in these people's shoes. And how scary that must have been. How scary. So, the automatic was a .25 caliber, and it is possible that had the children run, they might not have been killed or even badly hurt by the little bullets it fired. I think I was just saying. But Kippy and Rhonda didn't know anything about that, and the bore of that little weapon must have looked much larger to them than it really was. So, none of this was really real. Not to Charlene, it was a charade, a dream, a kaleidoscope of horror she watched, but she definitely could not feel. Jerry issued orders, and he went to work immediately. The tape was used to bind the girls hand and foot once he had forced them to lie on the floor of the van. Then he told Charlene to sit on top of an ice chest they kept behind the floor seats and make sure the newly recruited love slaves kept quiet. Jerry started the van and it moved out of the parking lot through the feeder streets to I-80, where he turned east towards the Sierra Nevada. Charlene sat quietly on the ice chest. She was numb. All of her senses had suddenly died. If the girls cried or screamed or begged, she didn't hear them. Never, except that once, when the older woman begged Jerry not to kill her, or to kill her, did she hear anything. And we'll get there. No screams, no sobs, no whimpering. There was fear mirrored in the eyes of the teenagers on the floor of the van. Real terror. Charlene could see that, but she didn't believe it. Jerry was still playing a game. These girls were in on it with him. It had to be that way. Hadn't he personally pointed out back in the mall these girls? That was because he knew them. He had set the whole show up that way. There was no kidnapping. Not a real kidnapping. Things like that didn't happen. To other people maybe, but not to Charlene. She would never be a part of a kidnapping. The van droned on and the highway began to rise at Penryn, gently at first, then steeply past Newcastle and Auburn, and into the heavily muzzled slopes of the Sierra Nevada to Baxter. The rounded hills were steeper, the rolling savanna of the foothills, where clumps of live oak rose from a well-browned carpet of wild barley, which was dying and dead as the searing sun of early September baked California's mother-lode country one last time, were replaced by files of tall pine trees which marked into helter-skelter columns toward the lovely timberline. Wow, that was a long sentence, y'all. Autumn nibbled at the edge of the heat wave. The air cooled as it thinned in the higher altitude. Baxter is a highway maintenance station for the scores of workers who keep I-80 open through summer's ceaseless stream of traffic and winter's strangling snows. It is the snow line where chains must be added to the wheels of winter travelers' cars before they can continue their journey through the Sierra Nevada. It is the place where an obscene dream became a reality for Gerald Armand Gallego. Now, every time I say his name, I feel like I'm saying it wrong. I feel like it should be pronounced Gallego, but everyone around me says Gallego. I don't know. The place where Kippy fought and Rhonda Scheffler began the last short day of their lives, where Charlene Williams Gallego was offered one final chance to remain a member of civilized society. Gerald Gallego turned off I-80 at Baxter, shifting gears as he guided the van up a twisting frontage road, across an overpass that traversed the broad highway and onto an area where the pines closed tightly around the two lines of pavement, and a quiet meadow opened beside the road. There he parked. He parked the car and turned his attention to the girls. He freed their ankles and ordered them to walk away from the road into the shadows of the pines which bordered them. So he told Charlene to wait while he followed them, and he carried it with him a little gun, a blanket, and a sleeping bag, and he was gone for a long time. So we know what he went and did with those young women. Charlene just waited quietly, patiently, refusing to believe that her senses were absorbing, but would not accept. It wasn't happening, she told herself. It wasn't real. Pretty soon, Jerry and the girls would show up laughing at the great joke, and Gallego would compliment Charlene because she was truly the equal to the girl with heart. The hours passed, and the day melted into evening as a chilly wind, borne above the timberline on the broad brow of a distant glacier, tumbled down the slopes and shattered the leading edge of the heat wave. Charlene waited, telling herself lies, wrestling with reality and rejecting it completely. Gerald returned. He gave her brisk, brief, confident orders. She should take the van back to Sacramento. Driving exactly 55 miles an hour so as not to attract the attention of a highway patrolman while she was in the mountains. She would arrive at Baxter at exactly midnight, drive off the ramp as Jerry had, and pick up him as well as the girls in the meadow. A signal was arranged with horn and headlights so Jerry would know that she was there. So basically he wanted her to drive back to Sacramento, switch cars, and then come and get her. And this is what he said. It will take you exactly an hour to drive down and an hour back at 55 miles an hour, Jerry told her. Don't go any faster or any slower. Take your time while you're there. Be seen and be back here at midnight. He was concerned, wondering if she could drive the van. She had never driven it before. Not until that night. But she learned quickly and was good with cars, a quick study, good at almost everything that she put her mind to. Charlene drove back down the mountain, out of autumn and back into summer, where heat haze shimmered and shook all over the valley. She drove almost to the country club plaza where it all started. She visited a friend while still driving the van and then changed cars, taking the silver blue Oldsmobile back into the mountains where Jerry waited in a night which was becoming frigid. People have asked if she was afraid. They have asked again and again why she did not call the police. Didn't you have a dime? One attorney asked her. Didn't you have one thin dime to make a telephone call, girl, and save those poor girls? Charlene, mountains, it just wasn't happening. Not to her. Not then. It couldn't be happening. So she drove on, following orders, good or bad, blindly, as she had all her life. She drove back to the mountains and arrived too soon, parking at the turnoff. Fate or luck or kismet or whatever whimsical spirit was riding with Charlene that night offered her a final chance to return to humility. A black and white police officer crept past on I-80 and then turned off into Baxter, rolled back down the highway, then prowled back and forth curiously. Charlene watched it. She watched it not with relief, but trepidation. She could not tell noises and the dogs barking and the cars and just everything. You can probably still hear them talking. They're very loud. And the dogs are loud. I'm irritated. Sorry. But going forward, she drove up the frontage road, crossing the highway as Jerry had, and followed the route he had taken to the tiny meadow. Then she parked and signaled him. Jerry appeared in a few seconds and brushed off her abject apology for being early. "It's okay, I was freezing my butt off," he replied. He had her drive the car into the clearing and then forced the girls into the back seat at gunpoint. Kippy and Rhonda were showing the signs of their ordeal then. Their clothes were stained and dirty. Their faces were pale and drawn. Rhonda's brown hair was matted with dirt and bark and pine needles. They sat in back of the Oldsmobile and Jerry climbed in beside them, assuring them that everything would be all right. "We're just gonna take you out in the country, someplace where you can't call the police too fast." "Someplace where you can't call the police too fast," he promised. Charlene continued to tell herself it was a joke. All a joke. The conversation was perfectly pleasant. The girls' voices were strained on the edge of hysteria, but Charlene could not hear them. She could never hear the screams or sobbings or moans. Never. She drove at Jerry's instructions down the mountain again, 55 miles an hour and no faster, until, as they approached Sacramento, he ordered her to take the Highway 50 freeway to the south until she finally found herself on the old Jackson Road. She drove at Jerry's instructions down the mountain again, 55 miles per hour and no faster, until, as they approached Sacramento, he ordered her to take the Highway 50 freeway to the south until she finally found herself on the old Jackson Road, not far from Slaw House on the southeast side of the city. Jerry was jovial on the return drive, talking, laughing, joking, having a party which only he was enjoying. This man just sounds so sick. Like, the more I read about him, it was one of those people who got pleasure from causing others pain. Through the numb confusion which had gripped and held her all day, Charlene realized he was trying to make the girls feel at ease. He explained to them more than once nothing bad would happen to them. He was just taking them to a place which would make it hard to get back to civilization and a telephone, he said. Charlene listened. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he wouldn't kill them. The thought was strange, foreign to all her others. She could never really explain why she would have thought about Jerry killing the girls when she really thought it was all a joke. She drove on, following Jerry's instructions, stopping carefully at intersections when not a human being, not a light in the darkness of the small hours was visible anywhere. She was being very, very safe and careful. She drove on, basically just did everything she could to not be seen. He had warned her not to take any chances, and she just kept thinking about that on her drive. He was nice to the girls, but he was snarling at her. One minute she was going too fast, then when she used the brake to keep the Oldsmobile at a crawl, he found fault again. "Don't ride the brake," he ordered. "Then slow down, you bitch." He ordered her to turn left and extinguish the headlights, warning her to watch for ditches at the roadside. commercials. No announcer. She didn't hear a disc jockey, aka DJ. Jerry and the heavier of the two girls got out of the car. The teenager was well built but heavy for Jerry. They were gone, off into the dark field, and Charlene was talking, assuring the girl with the long, light brown hair everything would be fine. Jerry wouldn't hurt her. And then Jerry was back alone and pointing at the radio. "Turn it up all the way," Jerry said. He ordered the brown-haired teenage girl out of the car. It was the radio that was playing. Charlene followed orders. Music shattered the silent night. "Don't turn around. Don't look," Jerry warned. He and the girl moved away and disappeared into the darkness. She sat frozen in the car. Frozen. Was she really frozen, or did she turn? She remembers the popping noises, which became a familiar part of her life. Maybe she saw flashes, just maybe it could have been the flashes she saw and not the popping sounds she heard. Whatever. All of it happened in a few seconds. Then Jerry was back at the car, standing at the driver's side, telling her to move over. She moved and he sat beside her, looking straight ahead, his regular, well-carved features cold and immobile. There was no expression on his face and none in his voice when he spoke calmly and deliberately. So this man had no emotion to anything he had just done. He had literally just taken the lives of these two girls like it was nothing. Those were the first two that he had actually murdered. She moved and he sat beside her, looking straight ahead, his regular, well-carved features cold and immobile. There was no expression on his face, none in his voice when he spoke calmly and deliberately. "One of them is still wiggling," he said. "One of them is still wiggling," he said. Jerry got out of the car and there was another popping noise. The girl who was still wiggling stopped and her body was perfectly still. He drove then, winding the Oldsmobile over the country roads back to Sacramento to their apartment. They rode in silence, entered the apartment without speaking, and Jerry sat down. He closed down next to her and said to her to sit beside him, and then urged her to sit even closer, like she wasn't close enough. When she did, he put his arms around her, encircling her slender body and then rubbing the back of her hand with his. He rubbed it gently and started to talk, but she interrupted him. "I'm glad you did it," she said. "I was afraid I was going to have to do it myself." So, she has no guilt for this, obviously. Now to chapter 2 of this first book. I forgot to mention the first book within this book is called The Fantasy. So chapter 2. Man, I'm sorry about the mufflers. September 13th, 1978. The September heat wave ended in Sacramento, as they often do with the first gentle rains of autumn. The trailing edge of a tropical storm had drifted north from the Baja Coast, bringing with it a scuttling clouds which mottled the evening sky, and now and then splattered the thirsty dust with a warm drizzle. Alfredo Oragal and his friend Samuel Ochoa walked through the damp evening along the farm trail which branches off of Mice Road to the office of the Silva Farm near Salah House. Alfredo was startled but not frightened when he saw the young woman lying in the little meadow just off the farm road. He looked over the damp, dead grass to within 2 feet of the young woman was lying on her back, and the dark stains under her head looked like blood. All of the color had drained from her young face, the features rigid and emotionless, an unfinished wax doll staring back at him through the dimming light. Alfredo returned to Samuel and told him the young woman was dead. They ran back to the farm then and told Enrique Orejal, the only member of the farm crew laborers who could speak English. Enrique listened to Alfredo's account of what he had seen in the clearing, and then a little group of Mexican laborers, which had grown to more than half a dozen by then, went to the barn where they knew Olaf Anderson, the farm mechanic, was still working. Olaf joined the delegation, which crowded somehow into Enrique's car. He drove back along the farm road into the darkness to the place where Alfredo said he had seen the dead person. So all of these guys, he just ran back and told them, like, you would not believe what I just found. And they all just like hopped in. They're like, we gotta go see this. They didn't even call the cops right away. They all just went to go look and see. So before long, the beam of Alfredo's light picked out a silent form lying on the grass. They all paused, curious and respectful of the dead. Alfredo, he was startled and really, really upset. This isn't the body I found the first time, he told his friends. So now they had found the second victim. They all stood there, knowing that they only found one. Now they have this other one. Now they see there's 2 deaths. And they're like, okay, well, how many more? So they all stood there for a short time longer, standing within, about 2 feet of the murdered girl, staring at what was left of her. She was so young, so pretty, so completely lifeless, lying there on the seared grass that carpeted the surface of the meadow. Then they returned to the farmhouse, and Olaf reported their find to the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Now we're on chapter 3. That was a short chapter that was just going over the discovery. Chapter 3. More or less, we had been expecting the call. Seldom is a missing persons report referred to homicide within a matter of hours. Yet the information the investigating officers had about the disappearance of Kippy and Rhonda Scheffler was so disturbing, they had called us shortly after the 2 girls were reported missing. The information was wrong, completely, terribly wrong, but it led us to one correct assumption. From the facts we had available, we believed there was a better than even chance the 2 girls were dead. Olaf Anderson's call reached the Sheriff's Department dispatcher about 8:30 p.m., and I was contacted by the watch commander a half hour later. Homicide investigations do not move slowly. Clues and even physical evidence are all often mobile and elusive. Witnesses are forgetful. Blood cells break down each moment they wait for laboratory analysis. Fingerprints become smudged. Footprints are lost and memories fade. My habit is to assign every man available in the opening stages of an investigation so that as little as possible is lost during the crucial early hours. This is a great detective. Before I did anything that damp September evening, I called Sergeant Don Haybecker and told him to get on the case and to assign detectives Fred Homan So I have an emergency call for this number, she said. Deputy Floyd ended the conversation, and a moment later his telephone rang. A deep, foreign-sounding male voice said, "Kippy's missing. Where's Kip?" "There's no Kippy here," the deputy replied. "Who are you talking about?" "Where's Kippy?" the voice persisted. "There's no Kippy here. What number are you calling?" the deputy asked. The caller repeated the question. "What number are you calling?" Deputy Floyd asked again. The man repeated the deputy's telephone number. "Kippy's missing," he added. "Kippy's missing." Super weird. So the voice on the telephone was insistent but flat and passive. Deputy Floyd said he didn't know a Kippy, then he ended the conversation. Recalling the conversation later, he guessed the caller was in his mid-20s. He sounded like he might have been on drugs, the deputy remembered. He seemed dazed or rum-dum. I thought that was funny. He called him rum-dum. The report on Kippy and Rhonda Scheffler reached my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning of the 12th. Corporal Chuck Desmond of Missing Persons said he and his superiors thought the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of the two girls was very unusual. I talked with Scheffler, and he told me he believed the two girls had been kidnapped while sitting in the front seat of the Subaru, but there was nothing behind his thinking except a hunch. Kippy Vought's mother admitted her daughter had been a runaway in the past, but had been doing well lately. She had checked with Kippy's high school teachers and learned she had attended all of her classes on the 11th. Neither were any personal items or clothing belonging to Kippy missing from the house. The two girls were still missing at 1 o'clock that afternoon. I sent detectives. but Kippy and Rhonda were not in any of those places. Right? They were waiting for us in an open country near Laos, south and east of Sacramento. How? Charlene sat beside Jerry in the Sacramento apartment and had just heard him tell her he had killed both girls. She looked up at him demurely, like a college girl on a date with a big man on the campus, and asked him how he had ended the lives of Rhonda Scheffler and Kippy Bott. Like, oh, so sick. He told her it was alright. He had knocked them unconscious with a tire iron before he shot them. It's okay, I knocked him out first. Like, this guy's crazy. Believe me, they never knew what happened, he said. Later, they searched through the girls' purses. There was a roach clip in one, an apparatus used to hold a stick of marijuana. He had to let us know in case we didn't know. Jerry examined it for a moment, then tossed it back in the purse. Drugs will get you in trouble, he said. He said it with a pious air, somehow indicating that what had happened to the girls was their own fault, which was very weird because he literally he grew pot. But okay, we'll get to that later. So, before they went to bed that night, they got rid of Jerry's clothes. He had been wearing a blue and white shirt with a solid blue collar and cuffs and a pair of blue corduroy trousers. Charlene remembered it was the outfit he had been wearing the night they had met. One day more or less blended into another. They slept a little and then rose and took the clothes to a dumpster behind a nearby discount department store. From there, they went to visit Jerry's aunt. He had been raising a little marijuana in her backyard, like I was saying. Knowing his aunt would be at work, Jerry went directly into a shed at the rear of the house. And there he produced the little .25 automatic which had been used to murder Rhonda and Kippy. Using the little anvil that was a part of a vise attached to the workbench, he pounded the nose of the little flat gun. Jerry drove to the Garden Highway next, along the banks of the Sacramento River, not far from the airport. So weird, I've driven all these streets, it's so weird. Where the river flowed around a sweeping bend, he stopped by the steep bank. Literally, the pages are just falling out. He dropped the little gun into one of the purses and then he tossed it into the river. So that's how he got rid of the weapon. He threw it in the Sacramento River. The gun will weigh down the purse so no one will find it, Jerry explained, sounding a little smug and tutorial. He put dirt and rocks in the second purse and threw it into the river also. Gallego opened the trunk of the Oldsmobile then, and Charlene saw the tire iron for the first time. It was lying on a rack with white sheets in the background. Most of the blade was stained by a liquid that had dried to a rusty orange color. Charlene thought it was orange paint. That's blood, Jerry corrected her. That's what blood looks like. He threw anything he could, think of that might connect him to the murders into the river as well. And then they returned to the apartment. Jerry began to make preparations for a trip to Oregon. Charlene was preparing herself for
here, and Jerry had promised to marry her there, but changed his mind at the last minute. He's done this multiple times. And returning to Chico and the ramshackle cow barn his family had converted to a farmhouse, Charlene learned that for years Jerry had been molesting his daughter, who was 11 at the time. There was a warrant for Jerry's arrest awaiting in Chico. They left in the van while he explained the charges didn't mean anything, pausing now and then to make sure she was keeping her eyes on the rearview mirror. Back in Sacramento, they visited Charlene's mother. While watching a news program on television there, Jerry learned 2 black men were our prime suspects in the murder of Rhonda Scheffler and Kippy. Of course, blame 2 random black dudes. So Jerry was jubilant. He was very happy that they picked these 2 other random guys who didn't do anything. They can't do anything now, he told Charlene as they drove home. They've got a pair of black suspects and they're stuck with them. No way they'll ever get close to us. For the moment, he was right. We were following a false clue, which looked so convincing we would not have known the truth for a long time. Otherwise, many, many lives would have been saved. So that's the end of chapter 4. Now we're going to go to chapter 5. By his standards, Gerald Gallego had reason to be happy. Our investigation of the murders of Rhonda Scheffler and Kippy Vaught had led us steadily in the wrong direction. Had he not been the cold-blooded killer he was, things might have been different. Had he left the murder scene immediately after he returned to the Oldsmobile, Rhonda Scheffler might have lived and been able to give us the information which was not available until more than 2 years later, when Andy Beale, a frightened and angry Sacramento college student, gave the license number and description of a late model silver blue Oldsmobile to a detective in the missing persons detail of the Sacramento Police Department. So when Dr. Pierce Rooney examined the 2 girls, he found a wound behind one young woman's left ear that indicated it had been made by a bullet grazing her skull. A second bullet had been fired directly into the back of her head, and eventually a total of 4 bullets were fired into Rhonda Scheffler's head. It is possible that the first shot grazed the young woman and did not kill her. Had she not moved, and had Gallego not returned fire the coup de grace shots, there is an outside chance that she would have lived. She might have been able to tell us about the blue Olds, the van, the blonde girl, and her stubby companion. Had we been able to talk with her, 8 other lives might have been saved. And that part bothered me. They keep referring to this other girl as chunky and chubby and stubby. I don't like that. You guys need to stop doing that. This is how people talked about women back in these days, I'm pretty sure. Women were just kind of like seen as sex objects, and if you didn't fit this perfect mold, you were just the stubby, chubby one. Annoying. But every available facility of the sheriff's department worked on the mystery. Technicians, criminalists, detectives, and beat patrolmen all contributed hundreds of man-hours to the investigation, my dad included. Pretty cool. We talked to the girls' friends, anyone they might have met at the shopping plaza, their families, and examined their habits and routines. What we found were 2 normal middle-class American girls leading ordinary lives. And if a married 17-year-old still attending high school is considered normal these days, he says. Well, my news tonight that are still missing. Did you know the girls? Stan asked. Yes, I did, sir, she said. The young woman went on to say she had been riding with a friend in a pickup truck at the intersection where Country Club Plaza and Country Club Center meet. There, she said, she saw Rhonda and Kippy get into a new maroon-colored Pontiac Firebird or Chevrolet Camaro. Nice cars. The young woman was positive. She recognized both of the girls. She had gone to high school with both of them and knew them well, she said. She described the driver, a black man with a thick scar on his face near the nose, and a black companion. Both of them were wearing afro haircuts, one modified more than the other. Before the conversation ended, Stan was able to convince the girl on the telephone to let him speak to her mother. Eventually, an arrangement was made for them to be questioned by Don Haybecker. Stan is a mild-mannered, almost subdued and soft-voiced man, but the girl had decided she wanted to deal with someone else, so he suggested Don. Eventually, we talked to 4 people who had been riding in that pickup truck when it stopped at the intersection near all those shopping centers, and they all remembered the 2 young girls getting into the maroon car, and with reason. One of the 2 young women riding in the pickup had shouted, N-word lovers, I'm not going to say that word, when she saw the 2 girls climb into the maroon car. The tall, slim one with the lighter hair looked at us when she heard that. The driver of the pickup told us she didn't say anything, just looked at us, so I got a real good look at her. I know I saw them because I shouted a racist slur at them and they stared at me. 4 people were riding in that pickup and they all said they recognized the photographs of the 2 murdered girls when they were shown on the TV and published in the local newspapers. One of the mothers told me that her daughter, when she saw the photographs on television, had gone into the kitchen, held her head and said, "Oh my God." After a while, the other girl had gone into the kitchen and asked, "Are you thinking what I am?" We questioned the murdered girls' families, asked if either of them had any black male friends. Kippy, they had later learned, had become friendly with a young black employee of the Good Samaritan Home for Boys. She had met him when she visited the home with her father, who was doing some carpenter work there. And during that period, the detectives were told Kippy had dated 2 young men. They told us they were close friends of Kippy's and had gone to motion pictures and social events with her several times during the period she was visiting the home. Kippy's mother said the young woman had developed an interest in social work during the same time period, and that she had become friendly with a young black man who worked at the as a counselor at the home. Suddenly, Kippy's mother said the girl changed her mind and said she was no longer interested in social work. The young black counselor, meanwhile, was dismissed from his job at the home for activities not becoming an employee of the establishment. Through the days that followed, we developed evidence which indicated strongly the young man who had worked at the home for boys and been friendly with Kippy was the driver of the maroon Firebird that she and Rhonda were seen climbing into near the Country Club Plaza. He actually owned associates minutely. Statements were taken from his wife, his 2 girlfriends, his haberdasher. He took a polygraph test, which was, as almost all such tests are, inconclusive. His car was then searched with his consent, and fingerprints were found and compared to the girls, and the results, of course, were negative. Some of the suspect's friends were positive he could have never committed this murder and never even owned a gun, but some disagreed, and at least one of his acquaintances was sure he had murdered the girls, but had no solid evidence to offer. The young man himself sent one of his girlfriends a note, a parting message, which was harshly critical of her because she had not provided him with a definite alibi. He didn't do his own cause any good. The first time we questioned him, he changed his account of his activities on the 11th 3. Not 1, not 2, but 3 separate times he changed all of his accounts. So that's not very good. Everyone who knew the young man agreed he had only one black friend. Many claimed that he confined his dating to white women much younger than him. We found his only black friend and learned that he had strongly resembled the second man seen in the Firebird when Rhonda and Kippy were supposedly seen missing, or seen climbing into the rear of that seat. Some of the people who claimed to have seen the 2 girls getting into the Firebird near a country club selected the former young camp counselor's photograph as that of the driver of that Pontiac. Others identified the faces of people included in a photogenic lineup who was securely locked up in a jail on the day that Kippy and Rhonda were murdered. We answered hundreds of telephone questions and calls and followed scores of clues. When Gerald Gallego and Charlene Williams returned to Sacramento after their trip to Oregon, the former youth home counselor and his friend were our primary suspects. There was no Andy Beal at Country Club Plaza to help us. We had talked to many people who had seen 2 young white women riding in a maroon automobile with 2 black men. There was nothing linking Gallego to the murders. Rhonda and Kippy could not be seen once they were bound and lying face down in Gallego's van. No one had seen them getting into it. Families of homicide victims like Kippy and Rhonda Scheffler are always devastated. I live daily with murder, and each new case adds an edge of sadness to my life. It is even worse when coupled with frustration. My job was to tell families what had happened to their children. I could not do that for years. The coincidence that linked our black suspects to the girls made the evidence doubly frustrating. To this day, every clue available indicates that the 2 girls did ride a short distance from one point to another in that huge shopping center in the Maroon Firebird. When the frustration finally ended years later, the sadness remained. It is, as they say, a part of the job. If a man can live with murders of 2 pretty and harmless teenage girls on his conscience and be happy, Gallego had every reason to be happy. No doubt he was. So, that is the end of the second book. Or the first book, I'm so sorry. The second book will be in the next video. I hope that you actually liked this idea. If there's anything else that you want me to add, let me know. Thank you so much for joining, and subscribe and like, and make sure you're here for part 2. I believe I'm gonna have 3 to 4 parts for this series here, for the All His Father's Sins little series that I got going on with this book. It's a really good book, but there's certain parts that kind of bother me, just the vocabulary and whatnot. But I hope you have a great night and you can sleep well.